Could I discuss with the whole group how to build trust in God? That'd be a good thing to talk about, I think. And there's some really simple and direct things you can do to slowly build your trust in God and get to know God better. And in fact, yeah, I definitely feel that that's probably a thing that...
moot topic for today, so definitely the right thing.
So does that sound good for you? I feel that...
Thank you.
Yeah, I feel that for many of you, you're doing emotional work, which is great, but you're forgetting the reason why we're doing emotional work. It's only so that we can connect to God better. That's the only real reason, right? Now, if inside of myself I don't, 1, believe God really exists anyway, 2, feel that God's an entity, 3, feel that God's very trustworthy, 4, feel that I can have any faith in God being good, if I have none of those things happening, then how am I ever going to want to deal with an emotion that's preventing my relationship with God when I already have all these blocks towards God anyway? So what we need to do is it all hard to come off, is it? So what we need to do is we need to come to understand some basic ways in which we can get to know God better and come to trust her, right? And for many of us, it's the lack of trust in God and the lack of faith in God that when we hit a certain emotion that's quite dark and deep within us, we automatically stop. Because what else do we do when we're self-reliant? When we're self-reliant, we have this tendency to hit the emotion. We go as deep as our self-reliance will allow us, but not deep enough to release the emotion, right? And as a result, because there's this gap about how we feel about God dictating most of our life, we don't actually go through into that really dark place that is going to be the real rip out of the emotion out of us, and it will be gone. So what happens is we get so deep till self-reliance kicks in and we go, no, I can't do any more now. That's it. Now I'm frightened. Now I'm terrified. Now I can't go further. And we even say to ourselves, and many of you have probably even said it, I can't do this. I can't do this. We tell ourselves these messages constantly that we can't do it. And so what we want to do is find a way in which to get to know God. And by the way, for many of you guys that are struggling with your emotions, this next part is also really good because what I find in many of our discussions is a fellow will come up to me and say, look, I have a lot of trouble getting into my emotions. And I go, well, actually, it's not really about getting into your emotions. It's really about getting to know God. And then in the process, you'll get to feel some emotion. You know, it's sort of the emotional side is really a subsequent result of your desire to get to know God, not the other way around. And then I get asked, well, I don't really believe God, or I don't really believe that God exists, or, you know, all those, how can I know? Yeah. And the basis of how you can know, I'll go through with you now, I feel. That'd be a good thing to talk about.
Could I just talk about that a little bit
Sure.
as well? Just that in the last 6 months, that has been my focus. It's been about God and creating this relationship. That is the basis of this path, but I too neglected for a long time because I was very caught up in who I was and not wanting to be that person and all these other issues and emotions, a lot of my family stuff. And I never stopped and went, this is about me connecting with God and getting to know who me really is, whoever that might be. And just stopping and focusing on that and exercising my desire to know and understand God brought me lots of different books and experiences, and it's also really empowered me in this emotional process. Like I really want my emotions now because I really want God. And God isn't this like religious figure that I kind of had a lot of baggage about, God and religion being the one thing and being controlling and hypocritical and all of these things. And really stopping and feeling who is God and how much do I want God has really helped me so much. So I feel it's such a beautiful topic to talk about and one I'm quite passionate about. Yeah. The other thing though was a lot of people have a lot of issues with trust with AJ. He's saying he's Jesus, that's a pretty big deal. And it triggers emotions for everyone on the planet, let's face it. Whether we want to feel about that yet or not, it's definitely there. And I was speaking to a group recently, and I was saying that for myself, I also had a lot of issues with trust with AJ, and I also had a lot of issues with trusting what I felt was this other identity, who I am. And really taking my focus to God and developing that relationship and trusting that God can teach me these things has streamlined not only my emotional processing but this relationship, because I'm not having to trust AJ. I'm not even really having to trust, I have to trust what I feel, but beyond that I get to trust someone who really knows what he's talking about. And that I feel for everyone on this path, it's not about us. We're here to teach it, but really, please know it's about God. It's not even about your emotions. Yes, we're emotional beings, but in the end, it's about God, and it's the best relationship ever. And yeah, that's why we stand up here and just talk about all these different things, is only in the hope that you might know God a little bit better. Because once you make that connection, you don't need us anymore. You know, yeah. So what we'll do is we'll go through how to get to know God, shall we? In a really practical, down-to-earth, pragmatic way. Yeah. Does that make sense? Something that will make a lot of sense to you. All right. Well, let's focus firstly on the issue of truth. Now, I don't mean God's truth here, and I don't mean your truth either. I mean, in this case, what I'm talking about is there are basically three categories that we can put most things in when it comes to truth. One category is, I don't believe that's true. Right? So let's call that category number one. Let's call it, I think of these things as piles of pieces of paper that I've put together from summarising different things that have happened in my life, right? So here's pile number one, which is basically all the things I don't know. Now, of course, that pile's pretty big, is it not? Like, you think of all the things you could possibly know in the universe, and for the majority of us, that pile is probably the largest pile of all three piles, right? All the things that we don't know. Or we could say they're the things we don't believe, and we don't even know what we don't believe at this point, because it's just stuff that we have never learnt about. Then there's another pile. Usually this pile, I might draw this pile a little smaller actually, wherever that eraser went. Thank you, babe. Sorry. So this pile is usually much smaller. And this is all the things I think I know. Now, for many people, that is still a pretty large pile because often we have a very inflated viewpoint of what we know. And so, you know, we have quite a large pile that we think it should be in that category. And then, for the majority of us, there's this third avenue, and a lot of times at the beginning, it's, and in particular when it comes to what we know about God, a lot of times this pile is almost non-existent. This is what I definitely know and feel as truth. Whoops. Truth doesn't get spelt that way. Truth. So it's like the for sure, the maybe, and no idea piles.
Does that make sense? So as Mary just suggested, you can think of these piles in a lot easier way. This is, I'm sure. This is, I think I'm sure.
Maybe.
Or maybe. And this is, no idea. Agreed? Okay, now, if you think about all truth like this is all through my life, the last 2,000 years, this is how I've approached everything. Everything I've ever done in terms of discovering of truth, this has basically been my approach. that I basically am aware that there's a huge amount of things I don't know. I also am aware that there's things I think I know, but they might not be true. Or they might be, just who knows. Like,
so is that pile like a hypothesis?
This is like it's almost like a hypothetical. I'm testing it. Yeah. So things in this pile are the tests that I put in place, really, about truth. But then there's this one thing I discovered in the first century quite early was that there was things that I knew for sure, no matter what anybody else thought or said to me. I knew that what they were saying or thinking, when it was in disharmony with what I felt to be true, it was definitely wrong. So one of the things I learnt quite early was about my relationship with God, that there is a God who is an entity, and that was something that I knew for sure quite early in my life in the first century. And we'll talk about why I knew that as we progress. So if you think that every single truth that you could ever ask a question about, so is there such a thing as the law of attraction? Well, when we first hear the law of attraction, we go, I've never heard of that, right? So that's in that pile. And then we start to experiment a bit with it, and we start to do some things with it generally, and we get to this pile where, well, I think there might be such a thing as this law of attraction. I seem to experiment with it a bit, and how it works, I've got no idea really. But you know, I experiment, and before I know it, things become real. And then once things start to really gel and I go, wow, this law of attraction is not about what everybody thinks. It's not the mind being exercised to think about something and all of a sudden it comes, but rather it's about desires and passions of the soul influencing the whole thing. And once I start exercising my desire and passion of the soul, and all of a sudden things are attracted and I notice the attraction instantly, I'm going, wow, there's a direct correlation between what's going on in my soul and what I'm attracting right now, right at this moment. That direct correlation is happening. And once I hit into that knowing, now I can put it into my for sure basket. Now, what happens for many of us when it comes to this process is we have a lot of judgment of the process. So in other words, when you're asked a question, is this true or not? Most of us have an emotion, whereas if I go, I don't know, then they're going to think I'm an idiot. So it's best for me to say, well, I think I know that it is, you know what I mean? Or even say that it is when I'm not really sure. In other words, we start to falsify what we feel sure about inside of ourselves just for the sake of pleasing somebody else emotionally. That's what we do, right? And most of us have gotten used to doing that so much that most of the time we try to live in this place here. In other words, where we think we know the truth and we're quite definite about it, quite sure about it. But actually, if we're really honest with ourselves, we're not really sure. We just think we're sure. Or it's a maybe, really, inside of ourselves. But we're not honest about enough with ourselves because we're worried about what everyone's going to think if I don't have a specific opinion. And this relates a lot to childhood emotions regarding our parents, right? If we didn't have their opinion, then automatically we were wrong. How does that apply to your life? Most of you would be that. No, your mums and your fathers, how many of them were allowing of you having a completely different opinion to them without them in some way being upset with you? Like, it's a fairly rare parent that actually can do that, and it's a very good parent who can do that too, by the way. So there we are. There are our three piles. Now, how does all this apply to discovering God? Well, if we put God at the top of this truth, so this now we're talking about the truth about God. The fact is that the majority of us don't know anything about God when we begin, right?
And even after we watch The Secrets of the Universe, we go, oh, wow, yeah, right. We can then want to just put ourselves in this sure pile, but the truth is we haven't had that discovery for ourselves. We've heard about it and gone, I think there's something in this, but... And
we're fascinated by it, but that doesn't make it real.
And we've got to stop kidding ourselves that it's real. We've got to go, no, this is my personal relationship and I have to discover this. So
we need to learn to be very truthful about everything, and including God. So to be frank, at the moment, for most of the audience, The truth is, there are a lot of things you think are maybe true about God, but as yet they are not certainties. Now, let's look at one of them that you raised, Vera. Trust in God. Now, if God was a certainty, and I knew for certain that God was loving all the time, and I knew for certain that all of God's laws were always loving, and I knew for certain that God viewed me as a precious child that could have a relationship with, and I knew those things for certain, do you think I'd ever not trust her? Of course not. So the fact that I don't trust her means that I don't know those things for certain. Does that make sense to everyone? The proof is in our life. If we're still being self-reliant, then we don't know God for certain. And that's okay. Don't judge that. Just see it as, this is the truth. This is the truth of where I'm at right at the beginning. Where I'm at right now is that I've got a very small shore pile about God. Right? Now, to be frank, some of us don't even have a shore pile about whether God exists or not at this point. And we're trying to follow the divine love path without even feeling for certain that God exists. What's the point of doing that? I might as well firstly go through a process of finding out whether God exists or not, surely.
And this is where a lot of guys get their partners going, you've got to feel your emotions, you've got to feel your emotions, you've got to feel your emotions.
He's going, what's the point of feeling my emotions? I don't even believe there's a God yet.
And they go, it's all about emotions. And they miss that it's about God. So, yeah.
Does that make sense? So a lot of times we find that the feminine side of the soul, shall we say, is they're trying to bully the masculine side of the soul into feeling an emotion, right? But in reality, the masculine side of the soul is going to the feminine side. So hang on a sec, do you even believe God exists yet? Right? And if she's honest with herself, she goes, no, I don't really trust God yet, so I mustn't really believe God exists or that God is loving or something else about God. Huh?
Yeah. And the cool thing, though, is that this is the most beautiful, important process you're going to go through in your whole soul's existence.
Yep.
So it's okay if at the beginning this is like racked high and there's nothing here.
Yep.
Every time...
Don't be scared of that.
Every time something moves across, it's a precious moment in the history of your soul. Don't try and fake it. Just let it happen, you know, and let yourself be vulnerable with yourself and maybe with God. That, hey, I don't know you. I don't know what's going on. This is all a big, like, jungle I'm in here, and I know there's emotions and I think you might be loving, but I'm not sure yet. And allow this process that AJ's going to explain a bit more to happen, recognising that every time there's just one more sheet of paper on the shore pile, it's precious. You'll never lose that, and it's going to stay with you for the life of your entire soul, which goes long beyond this earthly plane. So it's like it's a cool adventure for me, you know, and a lot of us get really pressured, like, oh, God, emotions, path, got to do it, when really, if we see this as a voyage of discovery, that we're getting to start really in the nursery of our soul, it's pretty exciting.
For me, it's an everlasting voyage. It's not something that has a goal at the end of it, in the sense that I'm just getting closer to God, closer to God, closer to God of what I know for certain.
But there's still things in this pile.
Yeah. Does that make sense? And like, there's a lot of things about God herself that are still in that pile for me. Right? The key is to not judge it. Now, the things that are in that pile for me about God will maybe quite a lot less than the things in that pile for you about God, but the key is to not judge where we're each at either. We want to assist each other to come to see the truth, and we want to do it in such a way that's both logical and feeling at the same time. Not just illogical but feeling, or logic only and no feeling. We want to do it in an a way that embraces, because it's only when you feel the truth as certainty that it actually changes your life. That's the only time. You can think anything, it is not going to change your life until you feel it as a certainty. Yeah. Is there any questions about it so far? Because we're talking here about the discovery of truth generally and the process to embrace, if you like, in the discovery of truth. Yeah. No questions, and we can proceed. So now what we want to do is we now want to focus on the truth about God, because to me, and if we think about it logically, God knows all truth. So it would make sense from a logical perspective that if there is a God, right, then that God would be the creator of all things, and as the creator of all things would then know all truth. And it would then make sense that if I could have a personal relationship with that God, I will discover truth far more rapidly than I would using any other form of experimentation. So most of us, when we experiment, so you know the scientific methods of experimenting, they're the kind of methods like, okay, what I'm going to do is I'll set up an experiment to test whether an atom exists. Now, I might have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars setting up this experiment to test whether an atom exists and how the atom exists. And I do all of these series of experiments, and really what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to prove how it doesn't exist. All right, so I finish up. So the scientific method is about proving the non-existence, and then what's left must be true. That's often what happens. Now, to me, my focus is more the opposite way of that. And I feel like the first question I needed to resolve was whether God existed. Because if I resolve the God existence question, then it would make sense that if God exists, I can now start discovering things about that God. And then hopefully, if God exists, that I can also develop some kind of personal relationship with God and find out through that relationship all the other things that exist, whatever they be, right? So to me, the question of the truth about God is the most important question that you could ever ask yourself or that you can ever discover. And all other questions in my feelings now were from a long time ago, my feelings are all other questions you could ask almost have little significance without first answering this question. But you see, what most of us do emotionally is this. Most of us go, well, you know, I've had a religious upbringing or a painful experience. I've had a religious upbringing or a painful experience, and so I want to believe there is no God before I begin. Right? That's what I want. How many of us want to believe in a God that's, you know, fear-inspiring, that punishes people, you know, that torments you for hell in hellfire for the rest of your life if you do one thing wrong, and you're never going to get to heaven if you do one thing wrong, and then who defines what's right and wrong? Well, that God does, but has he told me everything that's right and wrong? No. So, you know, it all seems very confusing, and in the end, I go, well, I'd just rather prefer to believe that God, as an entity, doesn't exist. And then you can see how in the New Age movement what happens is that many then go into this feeling that, well, God's an energy and not an entity, right? And it helps get away a lot of things that way, because if God was an entity and we see all these unloving things happening around us, we go, well, God mustn't be very nice, right? So we can't accept that God isn't very nice. So let's accept that God is an energy instead. In other words, is an uncaring, unfeeling powerhouse. Basically, that's what many of us would prefer God to be as well. And we get away with a lot of emotions that way, don't we? We get to deny a lot of emotions about resolving questions about God that way. So once we start to focus on, all right, this question whether God exists, so just write God back into the equation, we're starting out in the fact that basically all of the piles are all in this pile, all in the no idea pile, right? Where we've basically just got no idea. When somebody says, well, what's God look like? I got no idea. And somebody says, well, what does God feel like? Oh, I've got no idea either. I don't even know whether God has feelings. And we go, well, did God create everything? I've got no idea.
Is God real?
Is God real? I don't really know. I've never felt God, so I don't know whether God's real or not. So the truth is, when we begin in this process of discovery of God, we've really got no idea about most of it, right?
Even if someone's up here going, no, God's good, an entity loves you, it's all going to be good, you don't feel that in your heart, do you? You're going, I don't know.
And the truth is, like, I can get up here and say, look, I've felt God and met God and everything else, but it's really immaterial to you if you think about it, because you haven't felt God or met God in the same way. So you're just going on my statement. And what's the point of that? That's not a personal experience where you know inside of your own heart for sure the truth. So even that sort of, while it might sound inspiring and it might sound beautiful, what I describe or whatever, you still can't really trust it until you go through some kind of personal experience about the whole thing. Right? So everyone gets that the personal experience has to be gone through rather than just trusting what anybody else says to you about any subject, but in particular about the subject of God. Yeah? So what do? What would you do given that almost every question you ask is in the no idea pile about God? What would you do now? What would be your next course of action, knowing that? To ask questions would be your next course of action, wouldn't it?
So that immediately puts us some things in the hypothesis or the test pile, doesn't it?
Yep.
Okay, I don't know. I'll ask this guy. He reckons God's good. All right.
I got no idea whether God's good. In fact, if I'm really honest with myself, if God does exist and if God's good, then why the hell do we have so much badness on the planet? Right? To me, that's an indication that God's bad, actually, not that God's good. So my first hypothesis might be this: God is bad. God is punishing. Right? And there's a whole group of consequent feelings that we will have about all that. So I have a whole list of things that I think are true. And I need to be honest with myself about this for this whole process to work. Like, as soon as I get dishonest with myself, I'm going to get away from this process actually having any benefit to me. So I need to be honest with myself. God's bad, for sure. My feelings is that, like, God is bad because you look at, there's 50 million children die pretty much every day on this planet. 50 million children under 5 years of age die every day on this planet. Now, if God cared about anything, surely God would care about those children. Yeah? So to me, those children dying straight away means that God is bad. If God exists, that is. Can you see? And I need to be truthful with that feeling that I feel within myself, that's what I feel. Right? My mother has been in a religion most of her life, and she's been in a few different religions in her life, and the whole point of being in a religion is to worship God, is it not? In most cases that's what people think, but my mum still hasn't resolved the question whether God is good or not. In fact, she still has a feeling in herself that God is bad. Would you go to church every week with that feeling? Well, to be frank, there's millions of people on this planet who go to church every week with the feeling that God is bad. And they still go to church every week. Now, it's a very important question to resolve, isn't it? So God is bad. God is punishing. They are the things that I think I know about God. So I start testing it. How could I test it? The feeling that God is bad. How do I test that? So on one hand, I've got all this evidence that children die every day for no reason. You know, parents hurt children. You know, you see that happening all the time. You know,
my parents hurt me, where was God?
My parents hurt me, where was God in that process? I often scream to God to not get hurt, and I still got hurt. Can you feel? Can you feel the energy in the room?
We were going to go to this place.
Right? Can you see that many of us are not honest, that we have some of those feelings in us, right? Can you see that? And the fact that the energy is going down, you've got spirits now, many of whom also feel what I just stated, that God is bad. Their energy is affecting yours and connecting with yours, and before you know it, the energy in the room goes really dark and gloomy about God, right? But we need to be honest, but we need to have more of an investigative nature with it. So at this point, what a lot of positivists would do is they'd say, God is bad, God is punishing, I've got the proof, that's it. I don't want to know anything more. Now, the problem with that is that if God does exist, and God would therefore be infinite, and if God is infinite, then maybe what we know about God is very finite, and maybe my perspective that God is bad has some problems associated with it.
So in this process, I have to be willing to recognise I don't know everything yet, and be willing to ask questions, like someone over here said. So I have to go, okay, this is the evidence I've got, and it feels really crappy, and I'd like to hold on to this. But what else is in my world? What the sun just set, that was very beautiful. I even felt a bit moved to tears. It felt like a gift given to me. But where did that come from? If God's bad and God created everything, where did the sunset come from?
And then the butterfly goes past us, a really colourful one. It just sits on a, limb of a tree or in a flower next to us, and we're just sort of struck by the beauty of it and the delicacy of it, and we're just going. All of a sudden, we're going, wow! Like, I'm thinking God's bad, but if God exists, God also created the butterfly. Well, and now I'm finding that quite beautiful. So the sunset's beautiful. I look at my wife's body, and I go, that's pretty beautiful. I find that really beautiful and attractive too. Like there's all this beauty around me that I'm starting to see. And we need to be honest. There is all this beauty around, isn't there? So in amongst the world of chaos, we do see, and particularly when it comes to natural things, we see huge amounts of beauty. Like, where do you want to go when you go on a holiday? You want to go to the middle of London where all the smokestacks are going up and the pollution is going, or even better, Tokyo on the wharf there, where there's all this just pollution everywhere, and you need a gas mask to breathe. That's where you go for a holiday, isn't it? No? Why don't you go there? Kick back and look at the view. Right? Where do we go to? We go up in the mountains or down by the sea or some place with a lot of natural beauty, because we feel attracted to that beauty, right? So we go, okay, I believed, or I feel that God is a punishing God because I look at all these bad things happening, but then there's a bit of a conundrum now, isn't there? Like, on one hand, God's a punishing God, or God's bad, but because of all these bad things that happen, but on the other hand, look at all these good things that happen every day, and what am I attracted to? I'm attracted to a lot of those good things happening, and I see them happening, and a lot of it's in nature, and a lot of it's not man, but rather nature that I'm attracted to here. And I'm going, well, okay, the same God obviously has some. How does that work? Like all these children die, but at the same time, there's all these beautiful things happening at the same time, including children being born, of course. And we're looking at it and going, oh, now we're starting to scratch our head a bit, right? Because we need to become open to the fact that maybe we don't know the truth about God yet, even though we do think God is bad. And we need to investigate the fact that, all right, God is bad and God is punishing, but now there's another thing that I think I know about God, and that is God likes beauty. And in a way, that's almost a conundrum, because you've got, on one hand, what you would think is quite evil happening, and on the other hand, what you're thinking is quite beautiful is happening at the same time. And so then I start making up some theories about that. You know what kind of theories I come up with then? Many of you have come up with these theories. It's about the balance. God's about the balance. There's got to be some evil with some good. There's got to be light and dark. There's got to be male, female, even they go there with that, which I don't see how they're opposites, but anyway, we go and we start trying to explain what God is. So we actually write down there, well, God is bad and God likes beauty, so there needs to be good and evil for us to appreciate good. And we start coming up with all those theories, right? And then we go, while that sounds all like it's reflected in the universe in which we live, is it very logical? Like, do you need bad in your life to appreciate the good times? Wouldn't you prefer to have just one series of good times with no bad? Wouldn't that be what you prefer? And then you're saying that God created bad so you could appreciate the good, but you spend most of your life avoiding the bad and embracing the good, don't you? And so we start questioning even those things. And the key is, like, for myself, I keep either a written record of all this investigative process or at least an intellectually list, if you like, of the investigative process. That's what I do with every single thing I do. Even now I do that too, by the way.
So let's say we get to here. We've got, okay, I know, well, I feel God is bad and punishing, but I also think he likes beauty. All right, so that's a conundrum.
I still don't know for certain either one of those.
It's not, nothing's over here yet. What other question can I ask that might that might resolve that for me? So if there is a God, is God an entity? Can I connect to God? Because surely that would help me resolve these things. So then I might start a new hypothesis. So if there's a God, would there be God an entity or would there be God an energy? How am I going to discover this? How would you discover this?
Now, it is true that I can say that you are an energy. Isn't that not true? You have energy, but could I then go, the energy is you? In other words, that you are only energy. Is energy the only thing you are? Don't you have more than energy? Don't you have feelings, emotions? Don't you have passions, desires? Don't you have thoughts? And while all of those may consist of certain types of energy, they're all very, very different for each person, aren't they? Right? So I'm starting to go, okay, this is very interesting too. Another thing, what does this tell me about God? And I can start writing down the things that I'm starting to discover now. Still the things that I think I know or are testing here. So I need to test, well, all right, maybe God has energy, but God is not just energy. Just like you have energy, but you are not just energy. Right? Does that make sense? You are more than just a piece of energy. Some atoms flying around, aren't you? Because for some reason, your atoms, when I walk past you, don't all of a sudden join onto my atoms. Like, and my atoms look different to Mary's atoms, and I wonder what's going on. The coalescence of those atoms into a being looks very, very different. And everyone says, oh yeah, that's genetics and so forth. But if we were just energy, I'd be walking past Mary, and if I've got a lot of energy, you'd think that part of her body would join onto mine, because we're made of energy, right? And energy can swap and be attracted to different things. So why is it that I, when I walk past Mary, don't lose a part of my body in the process? Right? Now, don't you be rude about that. And then as I walk past, like, I still retain my sense of being, my sense of self, right? And she's still retained her sense of self. And I go, okay, we seem to have some kind of way of keeping our energy in a place that makes sense. In other words, that joins it to being an entity that makes me me. And Mary seems to have a way of keeping her energy together that makes her Mary. And she seems to be very unique to many of you. Like Lena over there on the camera, she doesn't look much like Mary, aside she's got the basic same features, female. But aside from that, you know, there's quite a lot of difference between the two in terms of character, nature, size, everything.
And I seem to be able to know that I'm different from Lena, and I get to know Lena, and I can get to know me. So we have a sequential life that we can remember and recall and think about. So there's something that's not just.
And I know I've experienced my life, and I know I haven't experienced what you've experienced, because that's been your life. And I don't walk past you. And when I think. I walk past you and I go, oh yeah, he or she's got that thought happening right now. I don't then think it's my thought, because I can know the separation between those two thoughts, and I can know the separation between the two actions. And we start applying all of this, and we start, well, this opens me up to another investigation about God. What if God is an entity rather than an energy? What indications are there that God's an entity rather than an energy? What things in the universe would seem to support the proof that God is an entity? Does anyone have any ideas what kind of things might support that God is an entity? Well, yes, aren't we the biggest proof? Like the fact that you and I, or Mary and I, are seem to be separate in some way, and probably less so for Mary and I, in the sense that because there are certain things happening that I can feel with Mary and I, but I know Mary and I are very, very different to any of you in the audience. And when I say different, I don't mean bad. I mean that you're bad or that we are, but we feel separate. We have a feeling that we are a different person. You know, I don't walk past you and go, oh, all of a sudden I'm Igor, you know. And I've had Igor's life now, and I've had Igor's experience, and I know, no, I might be able to learn his experience, and I might be able to see it in his soul, but I still know myself to be a different person than Igor.
And how do you do that?
In terms of seeing or knowing.
No, how do you learn Igor's life? You have a relationship
with Igor, and I ask him questions, and later on, actually, the more developed I become, I actually notice myself starting to actually see Igor's soul and feel what's happened in Igor's life, and I can actually walk past Igor and actually tell him what's happened in his life, but I still know it's Igor's life. It's not mine. I can still feel that.
So we might learn about God, or hypothesise that God might be an entity that we might learn to know through a relationship.
Yeah. So what would we do to discover that? To test that theory. What would you do to test the theory with a person? you would go up to the person and say, sit down. I want to see whether you're the same as I am.
Do you like chocolate?
Do you like chocolate?
Yes.
Yes.
Do you like broccoli?
No. You like broccoli? So we start seeing the differences, but then we start even talking about the emotion, like the feelings that we've had, the experiences that we've had in life. Did you have this experience when you were a child? No, I did. What about that experiences? No, I didn't have that, but you did, and so forth. And so we start seeing ourselves as separate entities, but we're starting to enter a communicative relationship with the person, are we not? So if I was now experimenting with this in a sincere way, I would go, okay, if God is an entity, it would make sense that I can talk to God. And it would make sense that somehow I can hear God, even though I'm not really sure how that would occur, right? Now, I can experiment, can't I, with all of that? I could take actions. What kind of experiments might I choose to do? If we have the mic down.
So I was just going to say that when you've got a relationship with a person and you say, how are you? You're not just going, how are you? And cut off from your emotion. You're actually saying, how are you? And there's a softness to actually receiving how they feel.
Exactly.
So I remember when I was little, when I started talking to God, I could actually feel, it feels so good, just the fact that there's this interaction between me and this being. So my heart would actually, it would feel like a warm, beautiful feeling that I was actually feeling a connection with something.
Yeah. So, and we can see this again from another hypothesis, and that is that when I interact with you, if I am blocked to any emotion whatsoever, then we just have an intellectual connection, which we both walk away from feeling like...
superficial and dry.
Exactly. We don't feel fulfilled. We don't feel any sense of personal emotional fulfillment in a relationship like that. So we could then go, okay, well, perhaps God's the same. Perhaps God is similar to us in the sense that we can't have a fulfilling thing, and if we try to just do it intellectually, we have to have feelings involved. So I can experiment with that. I could start actually spending time by myself, seeing whether I can feel God or feel God's answers to me. Do you follow me? So I can experiment, can't I? I can just experiment with that. So I could talk to God, and when I talk to God, have a feeling goes with it. So in other words, it's not a bland thing anymore where I just intellectually, Hail Mary, Mother of God, Hail Mary, Mother of God, you know, God, and so forth. Not like we were taught when we were younger, but now what I've got going on is a feeling with God. Like I really feel like I want to know. If you exist, I want to know you. That, and as a feeling.
some of us might even start with, you know what, God, I've really got the shits. You're bad.
Yeah.
And you know,
that's my feeling. Now, can you show me something, firstly, to prove to me that you're not? But also, like, I'm still going to talk with you because I still want to know whether I'm right or not. Because at this point, I don't know whether I'm right still, do I? It's only when I'm sure that I'm going to know whether I'm right or not. So, and that's going to be also something that we feel as a truth with a complete certainty with us. And by the way, once it gets here, you'll be life and death on the issue. Do you know what I mean by that? In other words, you'd be willing to die for that particular truth, not out of anger or fear, but just because you know it's a truth and that's it. And nobody will be able to shake you in that place. If we just have the mic go back.
I've talked to God a lot, but I don't feel like I'm being talked back to. So am I blocking God?
Well, that's another question we need to put into this pile, isn't it? So if I'm talking to God a lot and I'm not getting any answers, either God doesn't exist or I'm not hearing her. It can only be one of the two things, really, can't it? Now, if I feel that there's proof enough around my universe to show to me that God must exist, then the second option must be the truth, that I'm not hearing her. Why am I not hearing her? Okay, and then we start feeling, well, all right, let's go for the feeling side of things again. When I'm talking with a person, if I'm just talking from my head to their head, I'm not really feeling them either, am I? Like I sit down with a person and I've got to question them, how do you feel about this, how do you feel about that? And even if I'm questioning them, a lot of times I'm not feeling it from them. I'm not feeling a rapport with them in any way, I'm not connecting. But then sorry, go. Say.
Yeah, and if I'm also saying to them, yeah, no, I'm fine, yeah, I'm really good, yep, a bit of stuff going on, but I feel great.
Which is not true.
Yeah.
So it might be like huge.
The worst week of my life.
Yeah.
Then are they going to really feel me? Are they going to really... Because I'm not, like Laura said, I'm not creating the openness there, am I? I'm not going, I can hardly tell you how bad it's been, you know, and immediately that's... I've opened... And
then this person here goes, I don't want to hear how bad Mary's been for the week. See you later.
I've just realised you saying that. I sort of feel like, why would God care that I've had a bad week?
Okay, see? So the real feeling in Elvira at the moment is actually, God doesn't care for me. How can God care for me? Why would God even want to care for me? Like, I'm just this little ant anyway. Like, there's, like, you know, how many billions of people on the planet? 6.5 or nearly 7 at the moment, billion people on the planet. And what, you're telling me that God actually wants to have a relationship with me?
How's that even possible?
How's that even possible, for a start? But secondly, if it is possible, well, why would he want that? You know, I'm just this little ant. I'm nothing really. You know, I feel like I've been, and many of us have been taught that we're nothing from our childhood, of course. And so we feel like nothing, so God must see us as nothing too. Right? So what we do is we put that in that pile. Be honest and put it in the pile. So put that feeling you have about God in that pile. I haven't yet tested the truth about it, but from my experience in my life, that's what it seems. It seems that God can't care about me. That's what it seems like. Do you see? So for many of us, what we've been doing is we've been talking to God, but actually we have a lot of these emotions about God that we're not being honest about. Can you see that? Like, we have emotions that, some of us have emotions that I don't even know whether God exists. Some of us have emotions that if God does exist, he doesn't care about me. If God exists, he's only a male. How many of you ladies feel that? Right? How many of you men feel that if God exists, he's only a male? And so forth. We have a lot of belief systems about God, and that seem to be true because of the life experience we've had, don't they? Like, for yourself, Evera, there is a feeling definitely in you that God can't care about me. You look at my life. It doesn't feel like I've been cared for by God in my life.
Then I get all conflicted because I think, all right, if I'm whinging to God and, okay, I've got things to whinge about, but I'm not somewhere in a slum in India and I'm not hungry. And then I think, well...
Yeah, Mum and Dad pulled out that card early in your life, didn't they?
Oh, no,
You got to eat your dinner because...
Well,
no,
they gave it to you.
They gave it to you.
And you ran with it.
Yeah, because, you know, they handed you the card. You've got a whole plate of food in front of you. There's a lot of people in the world that don't have a whole plate of food in front of you. You eat it. That's one of the cards that gets handed to us very early in life. In other words, you're not allowed to have a bad feeling and you're not allowed to make your own choice because I'm telling you other people have got it worse than you have. Right? And this is a very early day card that most parents play on their children in order to manipulate them into doing what the parent wants. Right? So while I agree that that has been an experience in your life, we're still not certain that that's how God is with people. Right? But it is a feeling we have. Now, be honest with your feelings with God. God loves your honesty. Now, when you think about it, if we don't even know that, we can test that. What we can do is we can say, all right, I'm going to, for a whole month, falsify every feeling that I have with God and see whether I can feel God in that process. Now, you could even experiment with that with your neighbour. And you go, you know, when you walk out and you're feeling terrible and they say, how are you? You say, I'm fantastic. You know, like you falsify every feeling and see how good the interaction is. And so you can experiment with the neighbour and go, yeah, that didn't work very well. Like you might be in a relationship with somebody or a friendship with somebody, and every time they come and ask you how you feel, you tell them the opposite of how you feel and see how that works. Right? And then the next month, do the opposite of that and ask yourself, well, with that experiment, did I feel connected or not? You see, what we do is we don't experiment enough, do we?
We get to this, we go, yep, my childhood was bad, I went to church, it was really, I didn't get it and I didn't really like the people there, so, and then really bad stuff happened in my life and then I felt guilty about feeling about that. So clearly God is bad and punishing. End the experiment. You know, lots of people out there have definitely done that, haven't they? And we don't keep questioning, asking, what do I know for sure? So
for yourself, very often what you do is you have these feelings about God that you're almost afraid to have. You know, the feeling that maybe God doesn't care about me. Oh, I can't feel that feeling because that disconnects me. But it's a feeling you have inside. So you need to feel that feeling inside.
Has anyone done that experiment and just like raged at God and felt like this is not fair and you've totally abandoned me and I don't want to do this anyway, and suddenly, oh, there's God.
I can feel a bit of God's love coming. Oh, okay, so you do exist and you do actually,
Wow.
you heard that one at least.
But you seem okay with that. Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
I feel like if I tell the truth about my true emotions, people run away.
Many do.
People, it's just like, oh, do not want to know you, do not want to connect with you, and then I just feel rejected.
Okay, so now the question we've got to ask is God like that?
I feel like he is, because I'm so angry at God.
I agree, you feel like he is, but can you see that there is a possibility, and this is why it's still in this pile, there is a possibility that you only feel like that because of your experience in your life. And you're actually imposing your experience of your life upon God. So in other words, there is this possibility, and this is another thing I'd write down. Okay, at the moment, I feel God just doesn't want to listen to any negative emotion I have. Right? So I write that down. And
I've got to be a good girl, then God will love me.
Yeah, only time God loves me is when I'm a good girl and I make sure everything's nice and fluffy and warm and lovely.
Be that if you don't even know what a good girl is.
Exactly. That's another question that I need to resolve in this. Can you see this? Can you see how many questions we have? You know, so when you really start opening up this process, and this is why most people don't embrace the process, is because initially when we start opening this process up of being questioning, we've just got thousands of questions. And we look at the pile of questions and we go, gee, where's like, how am I ever going to resolve that list of questions? And so what do? We get all those questions and we roll them all up, we put them to one side and say, I'll get on with life. And if one of those questions come up at some point in the future, I'll have a look at it. That's what we do. But when you're dedicated to resolving these questions, you'll find you'll get them resolved very, very rapidly.
And that's what I was going to say. Once we start this process of going, okay, maybe God's an entity and maybe it's the honesty and the emotional openness that creates connection with us, between me and God, then things can move really rapidly.
So I can now start being honest with God. Look, God, to be frank, I think you created a bit of a crap universe, actually. And the laws that you've made, I feel, if they're laws at all, like, because it feels like to me there's a lot of anarchy and no law, but if there are any laws at all, why don't you give us a book or something? And then some religious person comes along and says, oh, he gave you the Bible. What? The Bible's full of crap. Like, I can't even read the Bible without it contradicting itself half the way through. And then in the first half of the Bible, it talks about God being a punishing God, which is exactly what I'm saying God is. Like, so how can you say God's a loving God on one hand but a punishing God on the other? That doesn't make any sense to me. God's either one or the other, surely. Hang a sec. No, we talked about this yin-yang thing, didn't we? That's right, where evil and good had to coexist. Is that what you're telling me? No. Okay, so you're telling me God's always good, but we've got all this bad on the earth. How did that all happen? I've got, we don't resolve those questions. We actually get this list of questions if we're honest with ourselves. A list of very, very good questions we need to resolve.
And like a lot of us have been told, no, you just have to believe this. You just have to know that God is good. Can't you know that God is good? Come on. Like, you would know if you knew God, you know God was good. And a lot of condescension, and we're guilted into feeling like, I don't have those feelings. It makes me seem like I'm ungrateful and there's something obviously very wrong with me that I don't know that God is good. And we get shamed into not exploring this whole beautiful process, which, remember, I said is like the most important journey of your entire soul. It gets all shut down because we feel guilty, we feel ashamed, and we feel like, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm just the one in the back who everyone's like crying and praying, and and I just kind of pretend that I'm there.
Yeah, and then I have this situation happen where, I ask Mummy the question, a series of questions often of, Mummy, if God's always good, then why do people die? And you know what happened when many of you asked that question, if you ever were brave enough to ask your parent who's going to church that question? You get a little tap across the face sometimes, or how dare you say God's bad? And, you get the anger-based response to shut you down rather than it being an honest question that you need to ask. And so what happens when there are questions about God is we're taught not to ask them. Can you see that? Like, you think how much in your own life you've been taught not to ask the questions that need to be asked about God.
Or absorb the feeling from your parents that you'll never resolve that. Just forget about it. You can't know.
And many parents get upset because they personally have not resolved the question, and they're just as confused and angry about the resolution of that question as you often are, or even more so. And so when you ask the question, they just respond in rage. Like, how dare you even ask that question? Or, they go down this track of trying to deny the process of even answering the question. Because many parents don't want to do this. They don't want to say, look, darling, I've got no idea. But it's a wonderful question. And perhaps we should investigate it more thoroughly, huh? Because we all feel, many of us feel that these questions are unresolvable. And since they're unresolvable, what's the point of asking them? And so what we do is we close down this whole field of investigation about God. It all gets shut down. We investigate science, we investigate, cultures, religious formats on earth, and we investigate religion, but we don't actually investigate God. Even when we investigate religion, we're not really investigating God, because we're investigating the religion's interpretation of what God is. Right? So we're still shut down quite a lot from investigating God.
I just wanted to say, once you ask the question and you get an answer back, the first answer back feels really liberating, and it makes it really exciting to ask more questions. I agree. And to get more answers back. So the more you ask, and if you have that real longing, it's just... it's
wonderful.
Yeah, and it makes it easier to ask more questions.
Yeah.
So.
It was Adele, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yep. Now, Adele, I'll put to you, though, the answers that come back could also be coming from an alternative source.
Yes, they could.
So now we've got this additional question. Was that wonderful answer I just got from God, or was it just from a person in another dimension that I can't see, that I think is God?
Yes. And you have to trust by asking more questions.
Exactly. You've got to
That-
keep asking questions.
That is the beautiful thing. Everyone just goes, oh my gosh, there's too many questions. Some of you are like, no way, I can't do this, there's so many questions. But that's because there's no wonder in this process. You know, if we just go into it going, okay, whoo, I think I made a discovery. I think something that's here could be going over here, but I just have to keep asking questions, then we can stay invigorated by this process.
Yep.
If we get really fearful and go, no, I have to know now, and I can't keep asking all these questions, it's taxing, you know, then we're going to get really tired. And that's where our desire for the process can lead us. And I guess the more you develop in the process, the more trust you have in it.
So every single truth that I've ever resolved personally about God and the universe and all of those other things have been resolved through this process for me. So, and please bear in mind that this side here, the shore side, I need to say a bit about it. It's not just what you feel and know is the truth, actually, because there is this other aspect to the truth actually entering you, and that is that it has to be actually an experience. So in other words, I can postulate to you that we can walk through that brick wall there. Theoretically, that brick wall is made of atoms, my body is made of atoms. Is that not true? Well, that's another theory that I'm presenting to you. And if that's the case, if we are made of the same of matter, then it would make sense that I could somehow align my matter, if I had control over my matter, and somehow align that matter, if I had control over that matter, and I could physically walk through that brick wall.
And you might even be able to explain all the science of that to us. Tell us exactly how that would happen, and you've discovered this new truth, and it's all going to work like this. And so you could stand up here for 3 hours and tell us how you could walk through the wall. And
right.
For sure.
And then when I walk through that wall, now all of that fact, although being presented to you as fact, now becomes proven, does it not? By the experience. Do you follow me? And it's only by the experience that what we feel and know as truth really becomes truth. So there are many people on the planet and in the spirit world who think they know the truth. They think they feel the truth is a certain way, and yet they have not had the experience, and so therefore they cannot still say for certain.
So it's like they're up there going, yes, I know the science, this is for sure. I know that you are atoms, the wall is atoms. It's possible to do it. I can explain it to you, I can tick all the boxes. It is a sure thing. But they've never actually done it. So they haven't had the experience. And that's the difference. They can even say, no, it's in this pile. But unless they've done it, it's not there.
It's not in that pile yet. Until you have personally done it, you will never have anything in that pile. And it's very important that we're honest with ourselves that it's yet to personally happen. So I can talk to you about God till I'm blue in the face. And I can tell you that God will give you her love if you long for her love, and talk about how to long for her love and all those kind of things. But until that personally happens for you and you recognise it as the truth in the experience, it will never become a fact. And you can talk about it all you like to another person, and it's still not a fact. And it's still never going to be a fact until you've had the personal experience of it happening to you. It's the same with the law of attraction and all the other laws of God. Exactly the same principles apply. Now, instead of judging the other person's experience, because every experience has to be a personal experience, instead of judging it, we just need to recognise, okay, I have yet to have that experience. And since I'm yet to have that experience, I can't say for certain whether that thing is true or not true. However, I can also go through a whole set of experiences and understand everything that's happening about certain things, and then I know for certain that thing is true. And I know for certain what is being said is true. And so the way, you know, a lot of the things that I'm presenting to yourself as truth can only be presented because I have personally had the experience of that truth. That's the only reason why I'm very definite about what I'm saying to you as truth. Many times you'll ask me a question and sometimes I'll go, oh, I don't know. A child in a recent presentation put up her hand and said, who created God? And I said, I don't know, because I've not personally had that experience of knowing that particular truth. So I can't answer that truth. And I actually said to her, I don't know anybody else who's had that either.
But you said it's a good question.
It's a wonderful question. That's still in the all the things I don't know box. Does that make sense? And there's quite a lot of things in that box still. In fact, what you'll find is that God has created this beautiful universe where there's so much in that pile that you'll spend a lot of your life enjoying the discovery of it. The only reason why we don't enjoy discovery is because we were taught not to enjoy discovery by our parents.
And not to enjoy this state of I don't know.
Not to enjoy that state, but not only that, we were taught if we didn't know something, that we were stupid, dumb, idiot. You know, there's a lot of emotional attachment to us not knowing things. And then when we got to this phase and when we started to experiment, when you experiment, by definition, you are going to make a mistake. How do parents feel about mistakes? Like, you pick up a glass, you're a little child, pick up a glass, it's mum's precious glass. She's only got 6 of them. They were come from her when she got married, and she's so attached to that because that, you know, that was a special gift by somebody. And all of a sudden it gets fumbled and bang on the ground. And what happens? It was a mistake for many, but what happens? Now you get this barrage of very negative emotions from your mother. She might even scream at you and say, why did you do that? And, you know, get all this terrible...
And so, little you's just going, I was just testing the theory.
So little you who's down here, looking up at this ogre now, who's yelling and screaming at you, is going, you know, what do you do now? What have you just learned about a mistake?
Don't test the theory unless you're sure, you know.
You might have just been testing the theory with glass bounce.
Or the theory that I can use my hand like Mum does.
Yeah. You know? And yet, as soon as we test a lot of these theories as a child, we automatically get punished, and therefore we become so afraid of even making a mistake. So I put to you that many of you are very afraid of making mistakes, yeah? In your life.
It's key, like for this whole process to work, you have to have a vital ingredient. And it's the ingredient that will actually speed up your discoveries.
Yeah.
Desire.
And the fear of making a mistake doesn't help desire very much, does it? Like, if you're so afraid you're going to make a mistake in every move you make, how are you ever going to follow a desire you have? Right?
And lots of people who have come to talks in the past have come and gone, wow, this is fascinating, but, well, what if this is a mistake?
What if it's wrong?
What if it's wrong? And no trust in themselves in the fact that they could go, well, if it's wrong, then I'll just go back to the drawing board, you know. There's so much fear that shuts down this huge explorative process.
Yeah, and many people in the future, once, you know, there's a lot of media attention that's being focused our way now, and sooner or later that'll go to the mainstream media, and many of you will, you know, get accused of being in a cult and all these other things, which you know you're not in, but anyway. But
maybe it's still in there, I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe it's still in your own I don't know category, I agree. Or maybe it's in your no idea category. But just the fear of the potentiality of making a mistake that can be judged by others, and you'll feel that, and you go, whoa, yeah, that's pretty big actually, like how manipulative that can be in terms of this process of experimenting. So most of you, the beauty of what we're trying to create, myself and Mary, is that we're trying to have no strings attached to everything. So you start to learn then that you can experiment without any form of punishment. In other words, you can on one hand go, yeah, I can go along the talk and listen, and then 3 months later go, I don't believe that, and yet AJ still comes up and gives you a hug every time he sees you or something, and shakes your hand and doesn't treat you badly. But then, so you know that even if you totally disagree with everything I'm saying to you, you're still not going to be ostracised or criticised by myself, right? And the reason why is I feel God does not ostracise and criticise anybody who's in an experimentative state. And she wants you to experiment her universe.
But she created.
She created.
If you look at a child,
to experiment.
which is the most pristine form of ourselves, what are they doing? They're asking questions. They want to learn. They want to experiment. That's their way of doing it. And it's not just an intellectual thing. They're doing it with their whole body all of the time, and their emotions, and they're stepping right into that experience. And whoop, they fell off the chair.
And they're not afraid even. Like, they fall off the chair, bash their head, got a great big lump coming up, and the next moment they go back trying to get back on the chair again. They don't give up just because they had a little bit of pain in the process, right? Because it's only when they were punished for the process that now they have huge amounts of resistance. Now, this is something we need to be aware of, that God, if there is a God, God is not going to punish you for experimenting in a universe that's full of experiments, right? So God wants you to experiment with different things. And the key is to feel as you experiment. And if you feel as your experiment, you'll find, but even that at this point might be a maybe, So you can see how almost all of our life is either in the I've got no idea or maybe. And it's only when we know and feel the truth and we have the personal experience that it will become a solid fact. Right? Now, many people in your life, throughout all of your life, have told you that there is this fact and there's this fact and there's this fact. You grew up actually reading history books where facts were presented, so-called facts, that are not actually true. They're just the accepted societal fact, but not actually. And then there's a whole series of facts about history, for example, that were never presented. There's all this truth that nobody's ever discovered about, like the truth of our nation, for example. Like, how many of us get taught in our school, in our childhood at school, about the genocide of the Aboriginal race in Tasmania, for example?
Or the stolen generation. Oh, they might teach that in schools now, but...
how many of us when we were young? Yeah. The reason why is because society has certain things they don't want to accept as facts, even when they did happen, because there's a lot of emotions connected. So while we keep everything as we possibly can, either in the no idea or this, it's only through the knowing and feeling of the experience that it will become this. Now, what a lot of people do, and these people become what you call philosophizers. They live in this area, never wanting anything to become that area.
They love this area. They like create a glowing facade of this is a wonderful place to be.
And it is a wonderful place to be, in a place of experiment.
But to stay there.
But at some point, something must become known as a fact for you to actually embrace a happy life and for you to actually embrace knowledge, right? And and in fact, if that hadn't happened in your own history, many of you who flew here today for today's meeting would never have been able to fly because of somebody not knowing and feeling and then experiencing the truth of flight, for example. That would never have occurred.
Because this whole process isn't one of indecision. It's not like, oh, so many questions, I don't know. Oh, ask another question, I don't know.
And it's not a process of philosophising,
no.
Where I'm just coming up with idea after idea after idea.
That's a beautiful idea, and think about the aspects of that idea.
And I'm only just enjoying the discussion of it.
Yeah.
But rather we want to, at some point, know for sure whether what we're discussing is true. Don't you? Don't you want some surety at some point about whether it being true or not?
So I can love this process, but I really want this pile. Like, I want it a lot. And that's the desire that will pull me through it. And also the desire, when you harness this desire, guys, and you go, no, actually what they're saying I think I want to try out, I'm just going to start with one. And when you really desire it, watch how quickly you start to get answers, or get more information anyway. Things that you might not have thought about God for 20 years in a really sincere way, and then you go, no, I really want some more info on this. You step into a whole other interaction and bam, someone you don't even know on the bus is going, have you ever thought about God? You know what and you're like, wow, okay, I've attracted something else. Or you pick up a book in the doctor's waiting room and go, whoa, yeah, that's really, I'm feeling that more. And suddenly you're in this process that was ignited by your desire for truth, but it had to be, like, you had to have the desire, the true desire.
Now, the only difference between myself and someone like the Wright brothers, you know, the Wright brothers who came up with that first flying machine, sort of, well, it wasn't the first, but it was the first that was documented successfully as working. The only difference between myself and them is that I've focused on the truth about God first, whereas they focused on the truth about flight first. But basically we used exactly the same principles. Do you see that?
And you know, the Wright brothers, they weren't very intellectual about this whole flight thing. Yeah, they used their brains, they were quite logical, but I bet they didn't sit back and go, you know, maybe we should work on that plane thing. You know, like there was a lot of feeling.
Desire, passion.
Desire, passion, emotionally engaged. When it crashed, they felt it.
And not only that, whenever they read every book that said flight is not possible, they go, yeah, we might as well give this up. Because they say flight is not possible. Did they do that? No. And so whenever you read a book that says, oh, you should give up this investigation of God, or, you know, God's not real, that's not a reason to give up the investigation at all. It's just following somebody else's opinion, right? So how does everyone feel about that process? Does it make logical sense to you as to embracing it? Yeah.